news. Alex, welcome. You made it.
I did, Brian, despite the gremlins. Well, let's launch into a series of headlines from the Daily Telegraph, which is supposed to be on defence matters, Britain's paper of record, so they actually take notice of things others don't. And here I'm going to give credit to Lewis Page, I think the regular or a regular defence correspondent with the Daily Telegraph, because he's telling the truth. Wasteful Britain needs to buy a new arsenal for war with Russia. So it's not whether war with Russia is coming, it's can we fight it? He suggests doubling the defence budget and says that all the stuff that David Cameron famously called green CRAP could actually be cut a bit. Other departments could lose 4%, and that would double the Ministry of Defence budget, because the Ministry of Defence, as he points out, is being made to employ lots of people in Britain to keep the unemployment figures down and to loan money, actually, to nominally British but actually international defence conglomerates in order to produce weapon systems that Britain never benefits from if they ever become battle ready. So he's seen it. His record is quite solid. So look at the back catalogue, which you'll find in the show notes as well. Britain's defence boom built on sand. We need to talk about aircraft carriers. Britain's jetless aircraft carriers are a national embarrassment. He's seen quite a lot. But the Daily Telegraph continues to up the ante as well. So the brand new chairman of the Defence Select Committee of the House of Commons, Sir Jeremy Quin, says here, well, he's been given the headline by the editors, we need to rise to the challenge of a pre-war world and quickly. So again, it's just taken as a given that war with Russia is coming. And his main point there is that nobody can retain or recruit enough defence staff in Britain, which is a Western worldwide problem. But he says that for every 8 that go from the armed forces or MOD more generally, only 5 come. So this one will particularly pain your heart as a Navy veteran. The Daily Telegraph has also, in the form of the defence editor, Daniel Sheridan, has found out that the Type 45 destroyers were never budgeted to carry sea-to-land missiles, the cruise missiles that provide the shock and awe when the Americans come up close to a foreign country's coastline. So instead, as you can see here, there's some treadmills and cross-trainers because that compartment of the Type 45 class has become a gym. We go on from there to see that Eastern Europe now has its turn this week, the Balkans specifically, for the war scare that we saw hit Northern Europe last week. MENA FN reports that residents of Romania have been warned by the Chief of General Staff, the gloriously named General Vlad, that war with Russia could happen at any time. Neighbouring Croatia, well, it doesn't neighbour Romania literally, but a neighbouring country to Romania is Bulgaria, which is where this news site is from, Novinite. They report that fellow Balkan country Croatia is reconsidering whether it needs to reintroduce the draft. So this is getting quite widespread around the European Union. But what else has been going on with defence generally? Let's have a look at this photograph here, which was taken by a Chinese source in the harbour of Yokosuka, Japan. This old rust bucket is a US supply ship, one of those that come and resupply US Navy vessels deployed to the Western Pacific. And even a landlubber like me can tell that that vessel has seen better days. Also in the show notes, though I don't have a slide for it, is that the US Navy is now allowing high school dropouts to be recruited. And I don't mean anything snooty by that, but the US Navy had its reasons for wanting people with a school leaving certificate, basic numeracy, for example. That has gone by the board for the same reasons that Sir Jeremy Quin was describing in the case of Britain, cannot get the numbers. We also see, it'll be in the show notes, that the US is reviving Pacific bases that haven't seen duty since they were fighting Imperial Japan 80 years ago. There'll also be a show note linked to a piece by the very nationalist American conservative commentator Vox Day on immiliteracy, a new word that he's coined for Uncle Sam no longer being the top dog. And he says that he sees signs that the US is already losing naval confrontations with Iran, let alone Russia and China, in the Red Sea and more particularly the Gulf at the moment. But also the Royal Navy has got some problems. We'll put in the show notes that the flagship of the new aircraft carrier class, the Queen Elizabeth II herself, cannot put to sea because there's been a problem with one of the connections to the starboard shaft, which sounds very much, Brian, perhaps you'll like to comment in a moment, very much like what happened to the sister ship, the Prince of Wales, when she was in dock for a while. So she cannot go off on the latest deployment, and she's being replaced by the Prince of Wales for that. Also, 8 years since Britain's last test fire of a nuclear missile, which was a flop because the data connection failed, HMS Vanguard, who's been in dock for years on a completely over-budget, over-timetable repair, is going to try again to fire a test nuclear missile in the Atlantic. So we'll see what comes of that. Any comments?
Well, my initial comment on the prop shaft is that it was acknowledged as a design fault in the first carrier, so it's not surprising that there will be similar problems in the Queen Elizabeth. But of course, the other problem is that the maintenance is now done largely by British Aerospace, I'm being told, but we've seen a decline in the number of people trained in maintenance engineering within the armed forces, and of course that's now come home to roost. So the skill level, with no disrespect from those serving and going through the particular training, the skill level reduces, the maintenance is outsourced, and when the problems arise, nobody can fix it. So sad times.
And indeed, it's not just BAE, formerly British Aerospace, but now international and not just an aerospace company either. Babcock, which have more of a contract in the nuclear boats, have similarly been taken to task, because one of the reasons we haven't been able to fire a nuclear missile for some years is because HMS Vanguard had to go in for that long refit after it was discovered that right there in the nuclear parts of the boat, there were bolts that had been glued together, which caused the then Defence Secretary Ben Wallace to get on the blower and to give Babcock a flea in their ear. But to close off my war coverage, Ukraine, Associated Press has got quite a giveaway here of some fairly tectonic shifts in NATO with regards to the level of support for the current policy in the Ukraine war. So although the headline is about nasty Russia refusing to turn over the bodies of plane crash victims, this turns out to be over 60 prisoners of war that were being transported into Russia from the battlefield. We look into the body of the piece and we see that a French military official with access to intelligence off the record told the Associated Press, fully knowing that that is the pinnacle news agency for the Western world, so it would trickle down, that France has concluded that the Ukrainians used, this would be a US-supplied piece of kit, a Patriot battery to shoot down that plane, an Ilyushin 76 transporter, firing from only 30 miles away. And the French have got enough radar telemetrics to see that what's gone on, telemetry to see that what's gone on here is that the battery was scuttled close to the border, went live for as short as possible to shoot down the Ilyushin, and then scuttled back. So that looks like the French saying to the Americans, don't even try to blame this on the Russians. We don't want any of your further escalation. Likewise, Poland, the most jingoistic of Ukraine's neighboring allies, is actually admitting now, in the form of the President Andrzej Duda in an interview on Friday with a Polish radio station, that while he hopes Ukraine will retake the far east of the country, Donetsk and Lugansk in full, he doubts that's code for he understands it will be undoable, that Ukraine will ever retake Crimea, and says, face it, it was Russian territory for most of its history. So we'll see where that one goes as well. I am hearing other sources saying that there is preparations being made by the Polish and the British to declare Lviv some kind of de facto capital of a rump state, which is something that analysts predicted as early on in this 2-year war. It may be time for the European allies now, even the Poles, to bite that bullet.
Alex, thank you very much for that excellent summary. And of course, fighting in Ukraine is at the moment horrific, as the Russians are clearly making progress, and the the Ukrainians are trying to defend key areas such as Avdiivka.